Hello, everyone, and welcome to the 21st part of the Q&A in the context of the lecture series, True Dhamma, Following in the Footsteps of the Buddha. Today, we answer many more of your questions, hopefully, and with me, we have Saif, and yeah, I think we will just start. And the first question is, Samadhi and virtue sound like the same thing, if you explain them. What is the difference between virtue and the Samadhi? And is it your turn? Is it my turn? I always cannot remember.
You can go for it.
Okay, sure. Yeah. First, we could distinguish between Samadhi and right Samadhi. But for now, I think we will just go by Samadhi in any case. When the Buddha explained Samadhi, he usually did so as a result of the practice, as a last part of the Noble Eightfold Path, as what the practice converges towards. Whereas he said that virtue is more or less the beginning of the practice, what comes even before you attain the right view. So virtue is more or less the training that ultimately leads you towards Samadhi. So concentration is when you pretty much have been doing everything right for a very long time, then that is your state of being. Then you are in a state of Samadhi, when there is no self, when there is misconceiving, when there's no misunderstanding. You basically enter jhana or any of the other types of concentration that the Buddha explained in the suttas. It's not just jhana. Sometimes he said this type of concentration, this type of Samadhi, when he described another approach in which you can contemplate your experience. So yeah, Samadhi is more or less the result of walking and walking the Noble Eightfold Path rightly for a long time and practicing rightly for a long time. A state without self, a state without misconceiving, a very pure state, the imperturbable, as the Buddha put it. And virtue is what leads there. You watch your intentions of body, speech, and mind repeatedly until you gain sufficient understanding so that you can actually stop doing everything that is unwholesome, stop doing everything that is leading to self-suffering and all the other byproducts. Yep.
Yeah. So many times in the sutras, basically, the talks about how virtue directly leads to samadhi, which is why they can sort of sound like the same thing. And it's sort of the opposite of a lot of contemporary practice, which kind of can often see virtue and samadhi as separate things. So you sort of develop your precepts on the side, but virtue in itself does not really lead to calm. So you have to do some sort of separate samadhi, usually like a concentration method to calm down or something. But that's kind of your model. It means you're not really seeing the extent to which virtue in itself calms you down. And if your virtue is not calming you down, then it's something to reflect on, that you might not be developing virtue to the same extent as the Buddha talked about it, because it does lead to samadhi directly. And as Flau said, the essence of virtue is just not acting out of greed, aversion, delusion. That's how the Buddha defines the essence of it, the root of it. And you can sort of make some vaguely artificial distinction and say, like, the virtue part is just the more like sort of coarser conduct, like just the right speech and just the right action, and the mental part is somewhat separate. But even if you do that, like, it's still the same direction of practice. It's not about a separate practice to that. It's just about refining that further. So it's body, speech, and mind. And then you can say, like, when the Buddha talks about wholesome conduct by mind, it's like giving up covetousness, giving up jealousy, giving up ill will, and giving up the mundane wrong view. And then if you want to develop further samadhi within that, you just basically develop further virtue, as in further purification of greed, aversion, and delusion at the level of your mind. So you would further to the covetousness, further to the jealousy, you would develop abandoning of sensual thoughts, abandoning of distraction. So it's all the same direction, just developing virtue, and then it leads to calm. It leads to one-pointedness of mind, to being unbolted, imperturbable, as Flau says.
It's rather interesting, because if you see virtue in that way, as a progressive giving up of everything that is related to greed, aversion, and delusion, then it makes sense why the Buddha said that you enter jhana, as an example, when there is no more. great aversion and delusion, so to speak. This is a state that you attain by gradually weakening it. And that is a very direct relationship. And it's very good to not see virtue as something separate from the rest of the training. Because if you do, then you very likely misunderstand the practice, at least in some regard. And many people nowadays do that, kind of. They think of virtue just in terms of the 5 precepts, as an example. That is usually one of the biggest wrong views that I encounter when I talk to people. They usually think that they check off the virtue in the beginning, yeah, I do the precept stuff, and then no longer think about anything when it comes to virtue. And they completely miss the part that is about craving, that is about watching your intentions, that is about purifying your mind from everything that is a defilement. I think the Buddha even said in the sutta that he spoke to his son Rahula, he asked him, what is a mirror for? Well, it is for checking your reflection. And then in the end, the Buddha said, yes. And in the same way, each and every Brahmin of the past, of the present, of the future will purify his behavior by repeatedly checking his intentions of body, speech, and mind. Before he says something, while he says something, after he says something, before he does something, while he does something, after he does something. And even when it comes to intentions and subtle mental phenomena. This is how you purify your conduct. And that is virtue. That is the essence of it. And that cannot be skipped. If you skip it, you can be certain that any results that you attain will not be what the Buddha described. And that is very important.
Yeah. I would also mention that sutta actually, because it shows how deep of a practice virtue is. Because if you think about it, if you think about your conduct by body, by speech, and mind, and reflecting on every single part of it, before, after, during, and whether it's unwholesome or wholesome, like if you dwell on what that actually is, that is the majority of the gradual training right there. That's going to include like not only by body and speech, but all the sort of mental phenomena as mentioned, as covetousness, jealousy, but also all the hindrances. It's going to be part of your mental conduct that you're actively fueling, and that's part of your virtue, is reflecting on that as you engage in it and ask yourself whether it's wholesome, whether it's unwholesome, whether it leads to karma or not. Yeah, that's all development of virtue. Yeah.
I don't think it would be wrong when someone would say that 95% of the practice is kind of that. You just don't do those things that are rooted in great aversion, introspection, or delusion, no matter how you want to call it. And as a result, you stop fueling your suffering. You stop fueling self and all the other things. You kind of stop doing your suffering. And as a result, you experience release from it. You experience detachment. And that culminates in right samadhi, when you have also attained the right view. But that part of the path we have discussed in many other questions. Yeah, anyway. Anything else you want to add, or should we move on to the next one?
Yeah, just very quickly, I guess that's what you just said is exactly what Sariputta says in the Right View Sutra as well. Is that like the root of the right view of understanding what it means is understanding the root of the wholesome and the unwholesome, which, like you say, is greed, aversion, delusion. So the entire practice is sort of contained within that. Just giving up greed, aversion, delusion. That's your virtue. That's your virtue. That's your samadhi, and it's also your wisdom as well. That's why it's the right view.
Yeah.
So yeah.
I think at some point the Buddha said that he only teaches one thing, and people always move past that and say, "Yeah, it's surely he didn't mean something else with it." No, he really teaches only one thing.
Yeah.
Anyway, let us move to the next question. And the next one is, can you practice to become a Sotapanna with the idea of taking a break once there and returning back to enjoying normal lay life again? And this one is for you.
No. The idea there is really that, like, for example, in the suttas, there are certain sotapannas who become sotapannas, but they sort of stay as laypersons, and often maybe like they not live a normal household life, even engage in sensual pleasures. And so there's this idea there that you could have the sort of the best of both worlds by becoming a sotapanna and then also engaging in sensual pleasures. But the point is that you can become a sotapanna and then decide that you don't want to make further progress. But you cannot become a sotapanna by having this idea that while I'm there, I'm going to go back to enjoying sensual pleasures. Because the whole point that distinguishes a Sotapanna from a Putujana is a Putujana delights in sensual pleasures and thinks they're valuable. So if they practice with this idea in mind, they're practicing within the idea of valuing sensual pleasures, right? Because they still think that even when I'm Sotapanna, I'm going to go back to it. So they're still valuing sensual pleasures. And because they're valuing sensual pleasures, they can't become a Sotapanna, because that is the condition for becoming a Sotapanna, is seeing the verifying for themselves the actual degradation and poverty of sensual pleasures. So when a Sotapanna decides that I'm not going to make further progress, he doesn't do it with the idea of, oh, I love sensual pleasures, let me get the best of both worlds. No, they do it basically out of heedlessness. They understand the sensuality is harmful, they're just lazy, basically. And that's why they're a Sotapanna, is that they cannot unsee that it is actually harmful. That's why eventually they will have to give it up. But that's not the same as a Putujana, who engages in sensual pleasures and sees it as valuable and is not going to give it up unless he does that practice where you follow the Buddha's instructions and see it for yourself. So ultimately the answer is no.
Every bit of sensuality after the right view is tainted. You know very well that you should not do that there is nothing really to be gained from it, at least not nothing lasting. There's little gratification in it. There's great danger in it. That much you have seen and understood and verified for yourself. And you cannot engage in the same way as before. You can become heedless. You can even, return to the lower life, as the Buddha put it, enjoying sensuality and all the other things. I think there are cases in the suttas where monks have disrobed 7 times to go back to the lower life, but they always returned. That is kind of the point. Because they knew this is not worth it. My mind tricked me again into thinking that is something worthwhile going for. But as soon as they are there, they realize, okay, I made a mistake. And then they go back to the training. And yeah, it really is a point of no return. The right view. You cannot understand that part. There is nothing valuable in that. Which is also why at least some Sotapannas start delighting in work, talk, and other things that are not really related to sensuality. So the mind tries to leap out to the next best thing. Work is not sensual. Most people do not enjoy work at all. But for a Sotapanna, that can be something that they can develop, which is also not very beneficial, but yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Anything else you want to add? Or should we move on?
I guess we could talk about a little bit about the simile the Buddha gave, just to exemplify even further. It's that simile that it's like a blind person that's washing themselves with this like absolutely filthy cloth, which is the state of Putujana. And becoming a Sotapanna is like the Buddha curing you of that blindness and saying that, yeah, that cloth was disgusting that you were doing it with before. And he gives you a perfectly white, clean cloth. So if you were that person, you would not be able to go back to that dirty cloth because you've actually seen it as dirty. And maybe like out of habit or something, out of laziness, you just keep doing it, but not for very long because you've seen it as dirty and as unsatisfying. So that is the state of Sotapanna. And it's not, they don't feel it as a loss as well. They see sensual pleasures as something that's genuinely just not very satisfying, which is the hard thing to understand when you're not there yet, because sensual pleasure seems so inviting at first. But that's basically what the practice is seeing beyond that immediacy.
It's very difficult to see the drawback before that. Because sensuality is essentially everything. That's your entire life. There's nothing that is really exempt from that. That only really changes upon attaining the right view. Afterwards you see, okay, that's not so nice. And even before that you can get an inkling, by the way. So it's not that you suddenly develop that understanding. Before that you can see, okay, what I'm doing here is very harmful for me. A drug addict, as an example, can see, okay, this is not good for me. And I cannot stop myself. Because they have not seen it in its entirety, so to speak. They are still having lots of blind spots. So yeah, you gradually move there. by practicing virtue and all the other things. Okay, yeah, but in summary, no, you cannot go back. Anyway, let us move on to the next question. And the next question is a bit longer, and it is as follows. You mentioned that stream entry is like a switch that suddenly turns on in your head, and you will know when you get there. However, certain teachers have said that there are people for whom the change is so gradual that they do not notice that they have reached stream entry. One notable example of such a teacher is Shinzen Jung. Do you have any comments about that? Again, I forgot if it's mine or yours.
This is yours.
Okay. I guess it depends, but no, it's actually, a stream entry is defined as someone who knows that he knows. That is one of the definitions that the Buddha gave. And the shift that you experience. I use the formulation that Thanissaro Bhikkhu uses. It's an earth-shattering shift. It is like day and night, Ajahn Chah said. It's like your entire realm of thinking is transformed. The entire world thinks in one way and you think in another way. And the shift is, at least from my own experience, I don't think that you can miss it. And I don't think that it's something that you can just overlook or anything like that. Those people who, at least as I understand it, teach stream entries that way, teach something else that is not the right view or the stream entries that the Buddha was teaching. Because as soon as you understand dependent origination, there is a very distinct shift, a very distinct change in understanding your experience. And that is not something that I think can be manufactured. As Saif mentioned before, you can hallucinate certain things. That is very much possible. You can manufacture certain perceptions and lots of other things that can seem to an outsider like the right view, but it's not the same thing. I don't think that that is possible, that you can just miss stream entry, but maybe I'm missing something.
No, like you said, it's basically the definition of stream entry, that you know it. That's what makes it stream entry. If there is no self-knowledge about it, then it isn't stream entry. And that's why it's like a binary shift, and why it's so earth-shattering, is because before you have no self-knowledge, and then you do. And it is a massive shift. And that's what differentiates between, for example, like a Dhamma follower and faith follower who are like practicing in the right direction. They do have the 5 faculties. But a Sotapanna is different because they have self-knowledge about it. That's why they overcome doubt. And that's why they have those factors of stream entry, which is like the verified confidence in Buddha, Dhamma, Sangha. And they enjoy that confidence because, yeah, they've gone beyond doubt. But yeah, before that binary shift, like the change is gradual. Like you gradually develop virtue, you gradually develop concentration, you gradually develop wisdom. You gradually develop the perception of dependent origination until it's seen through spotlessly. But the fruition, so to speak, I know that word's sort of laden with a lot of interpretations, is unmistakable. Because, yeah, like we've been saying, it is about that self-knowledge. Like, it's impossible to doubt. Yeah.
You've just seen it. You have realized it for yourself, and there's nothing that you can really doubt about it. I don't really know what those people are talking about. I mean, that such a shift is very gradual. Maybe they mean the training that leads up to it. But the actual shift is binary. It's kind of only for a moment, and then the entire training that you did before continues. But well, I can only guess, so to speak. I personally don't know Shinzen Jung too much, but maybe you have an opinion on him and some knowledge.
No, I was about to say I have no idea about the many of this. When we're talking about these things, we're not trying to like degrade what specific teachers are saying, but we're just talking about how we see the sutras are saying, basically. And
yeah, maybe that's kind of important. At least I don't really know a great many teachers. I only really know the suttas and some very limited number of teachers who I can comment on. But overall, I like to stay on a very general level, and I don't really like to criticize or bash any other teachers. So I don't really see any value in that. So if you have questions, just a short remark, try to ask them on a topic and not on a teacher. That makes it easier for us to answer. Yeah. So in summary, it's binary. It's strong. It's very different from before, and it's not something that you can miss. It's like getting hit by a lightning strike. When physically,
You realize.
Yeah.
I was just going to say, you realize because you will actually like try to doubt it, because obviously it's built up in your head for a long time that extreme-entry is this very rare thing, and people like misdiagnose it and so on. But like doubt will be coming up, and you will try to doubt, and you will just realize I can't anymore. It's impossible. My mind's sort of above that, and that's why it's like, my God, it's before I was within that domain, and now it's just completely and utterly impossible. And then all this self-knowledge comes to, and you're like, oh, this is what the Buddha was talking about. And you read the sutras, and you're like, I can understand this now. And you'll also reflect on yourself, and you will realize that this is now the direction of our mind. It's heading towards Nibbana, necessarily so. And yeah, that's before you didn't have that, and now you do. So it's binary shift.
And I think on one occasion the Buddha even said, even if a noble one tries to suffer, he is vastly incapable of doing so. Even if he wanted to. And just as an example, recently my grandmother, who was very dear to me, died. And I tried to suffer, and it's just not possible. You cannot do that. That is something that is just completely impossible. It's an interesting shift, and that is those are occasions when you can really verify, so to speak, the teachings for yourself. It is indeed not possible. Previously, I would have pulled my hair, beaten my chest, suffered greatly, and afterwards, you cannot do that.
Yeah. The cannot part is the most important part. It's not about like suffering arises and then I know the exact thing to do in my experience to make it diminish. It's just you cannot suffer. Even if you put no effort into it, it's just impossible.
I mean, you kind of have been doing it all along, you're suffering, and now you no longer do it. And why on earth would the mind go back there? It's just inconceivable. Yeah. Okay. Anyway, I think that is enough on that question. Let us move to the next one. And this one is a bit shorter. And he wants to know, the person asking, in what context is it acceptable to rejoice? What can be savored blamelessly? Is it mine? Or is it yours?
This one's mine now.
Perfect.
What you rejoice in basically is a mind of non-craving. So the reason why I say that is because the normal mind rejoices in pleasure and pain, which is very different from non-craving. And the reason why pleasure and pain are not to be delighted in is because they're impermanent. So, for example, if you're like enjoying company and you have this pleasantness of this connection with someone, all you have to do is sort of reflect and be like, if this person thought of me differently the next day, would my mind change? Would my mind suffer from it? And you realize, like, yeah, so I'm attached to it. I'm dependent on it. And that pleasure, if you rejoice in that, it's going to be increasing your attachment and so on. But the mind of non-craving is a pleasant thing, but it's not pleasant because of a presence or pleasant feeling. It's pleasant because it doesn't matter what you experience. You cannot suffer from it. And like you can reflect on that, like we said before, by asking yourself, like, if this were to change, would my mind be perturbed by that? And if the answer is no, then the joy is the joy of non-craving. At least that's one way of trying to ferret that out. So, if you're in the forest or something and you have this agreeable perception of the forest, the pleasantness of that is not necessarily craving bound. But you should ask yourself, like, if it were to start raining right now or something, would my mind be perturbed? Would my mind be annoyed and irritated? If the answer is yes, then yeah, there is sort of that craving there. And there is more work to be done in the changing the direction of where your mind rejoices. But the point is also that these are kind of pointers. That you're never going to get an answer that's going to directly tell you, like, rejoice in this, don't rejoice in that. Because the whole point is that at the beginning, you rejoice in the wrong things. And it's this gradual redirection of the mind towards rejoicing instead of in pleasure and pain. You rejoice in non-craving and you don't rejoice in craving. So it's a gradual shift, and discerning the middle way takes time. And the main thing you got to do is always be aware of your intentions of lust, aversion, and distraction. Try to discern why that's unwholesome. And also contemplate uncertainty and whether your mind turns away from uncertainty. Whether like the change in your perceptions, change in feeling is perturbing you. And if it doesn't, then there'll be pleasantness of non-suffering there. And that's what you rejoice in. That's the wholesome rejoicing, wholesome savoring, which is actually extremely necessary part of the practice.
And not something that you can avoid. I mean, if you practice rightly, that is something that will happen. Yeah. I mean, it might be beneficial to talk about that joy in different ways, because it's sometimes very hard to explain that and to understand that. I mean, you can only really fully understand it as a sotapanna, but you can obviously get an idea before. And what I really like is the formulation that I recently picked up, which is that joy is relief born. That it's the joy of safety, so to speak, the joy of safety from suffering, the joy of relief from something impressive being removed. That is kind of the joy that the joy of the Dhamma is. And that is the greatest joy, because you realize that you have been in this domain that is full of danger, full of suffering, and you cannot touch by it. You cannot be touched by it anymore. And I don't think that there is anything greater. But it's very difficult to convey that idea, because people are usually very swamped in their sensuality. And when you are completely within it, you do not see anything else. I mean, sure, I can tell you that this or that food is greater than everything that you have imagined before or something, but yeah, it's very limited, and it doesn't really convey the message. So when I tell you, okay, there's something better, and it goes against everything that you value, then you kind of have to go by faith, and you need a good reason to do that. Yeah. Anything else?
I guess we could say, in terms of that relief, the most perfect expression of that, except from obviously Nibbana, would be being able to sit alone without distractions and to be happy right there, basically, because the mind does not need anything for its happiness. And the more it dwells like that, the more you realize that if I dwell like that, then it doesn't even matter if what feeling comes my way, whether it's pleasant, unpleasant, or neutral. The mind sort of remains the same. So that's basically the most perfect expression of that. And you could even sort of analyze your experience and ask yourself, whatever action is leading me away from being able to enjoy that, that's the joy that's not something you should rejoice in. So, like, if you're dwelling like that and you want to go towards the joy of distraction or sensual pleasures, obviously, that's going to be something that's factually taking you away from that state of being, of relief, of joy born of relief, non-craving, of not having to do anything in regards to whatever feeling is present. So I know that joy, that other joy, is going to be unwholesome. So having that image of how I should be dwelling if I'm doing the right kind of rejoicing can be helpful. And it's basically that, non-activity.
Yeah. That's actually a perfect training. So when the monks in the suttas, as an example, went somewhere for their daily abiding, you could say that they literally were doing just that. They sat somewhere and abided, if that's the right word, or the right tense. Yeah. They just sit there, and if it's not the most perfect and sublime thing, the sitting just like there with your eyes open preferably, then there is something missing. Then there is something wrong, so to speak. And you can use that as a tool to diagnose if you are moving in the right direction. So the more you can actually take joy in that kind of abiding, the closer you come to what the real practice is.
Yeah. And the more you dwell like that, the more sort of, well, everything becomes pleasant, because everything's sort of the same to you. Everything is doesn't make you suffer anymore. Whereas before, you were always dependent on some level of some degree of pleasure for your basis of your existence, and anything below that was like dull to you, not good enough. For now, while you dwell like this, everything is good enough for you. So even like if you're in a blank white room, that's the most delightful thing for you. That's like even said in the suttas, like if you develop this jhana, then even sleeping on like some leaves on the ground will seem to you like the king's bed with all the coverlets and so on. But yeah, that's because the mind is doesn't crave anymore.
In that regard, it is unconditioned. It is no longer dependent on anything else for its happiness. The unconditioned is not a magical experience or something, or some metaphysical idea. It is literally, you are not suffering no matter how the circumstances are. You are detached from the circumstances and just happy. Yeah. And it's the central part. Again, the only reason why we usually do not emphasize that too much is that the training is leading, at least initially, in another direction. We focus on what you must do and not so much on the result. At least that's how I like to do it, because a person who is not yet free from suffering needs instructions on what to do and what not to do to become free from suffering, and not so much inspiration. Sometimes inspiration is very necessary, but yeah. Okay. Yeah, do we have time for one more question? I think one more might be on the table.
Actually, I think this next question might be a long one, so...
Might be a long one. Okay. Well, in that case, it might be a good time. I mean, we have been recording for 30 minutes now. It might be a good time to stop. So again, if you have any follow-up questions, feel free to put them down below. We will be sure to answer them, unless it has been asked many times before. Then we will probably give you an answer on YouTube or something, but not make an entire new video out of it. But yeah, thank you very much for watching. And yeah, have a nice day and goodbye.